Hello, hello. Welcome to the third installment of our Advocacy Month Café Chats. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. If you haven't heard about the Advocacy Café Chats, or if this is your first visit, these are a recap at the end of each week as part of Advocacy Month 2022, hosted by incredible advocates from different chronic disease communities, each one with unique backgrounds and talents. Our first Advocacy Cat panelist is Sarah Ramey, a musician and writer who's been featured in the Paris Review, NPR, and too many others to name. She's received an MFA in creative writing, nonfiction writing from Columbia University, and was a writer for President Obama's 2008 campaign. Sarah has been living with pain and chronic illness for over 17 years and has authored her first book, which is called a darkly funny memoir titled The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness. Welcome, Sarah. Next on the panel, we have Cynthia Adinig, a marketing specialist and equity policy advisor. She sits on the board of Solve.me and is a person with long COVID and a self-described policy nerd. We geek out over policy often. She has spent over a decade engaged in community service, focused on low-income communities of color. She has been a campaign manager and a policy advisor to political campaign and uses her knowledge to both advocate for people with ME/CFS and long COVID communities. Thank you so much. Welcome, Cynthia Adinig. Pardon. And our third panelist is the lovely Sarah Tompkins, a patient with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and an amazing advocate for rare diseases and invisible illnesses. You may recognize Sarah from previous year's Empower Emmy, where she joined us to represent her amazing advocacy work with the Rare Disease Legislative Associates. As another amazing accomplishment, she's also Miss Wheelchair USA for 2022. So thank you so much and welcome, Sarah Tompkins. Thank you. And this week, I'm actually the special guest. So allow me to introduce myself. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Emily Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Engagement here at Solve.me and of the the Solve Long COVID Initiative. I am also a policy nerd. My background is in political affairs and government relations. I previously worked in autism, where I did state and federal level policy. But my real passion and my real journey has been as a caregiver for my mother with ME/CFS for the last over almost 15 years. Wow, over 15 years. And it just time flies. And that has driven me to become the power behind the Advocacy Month activities for the last 6 years. And so I'm here to answer any of the questions that you all might have about what we accomplished these past amazing 3 weeks. So with that, I'll turn it over to our lovely Advocacy Cafe panelists, and I am yours to do with what you will.
I will go first. I'm so excited to be interviewing you because you're our captain. Oh, captain, my captain. And the first question that I wanted to ask, or that we all wanted to ask you, is because we've seen a lot of this in the comments, and I think we all are wondering about this, is how will these bills help, these long COVID bills, help the ME/CFS community? And also building on that, could you talk a little bit about just sort of like, never use this word in my life, but the synergy between the ME/CFS community and the long COVID community? How, because what I've seen is that, you know, while you could see that those could maybe compete against each other, they're really so much stronger when they work together. And I know you've done a lot to spearhead that partnership. So could you speak to some of those topics?
Absolutely, I'd be love to. So I'm going to take the second part first and then the first part second. So speaking about the synergy, these bills are truly the result of that synergy. The long COVID patient organizations have overwhelmingly and resoundingly turned to ME as a guidebook, as a resource, as a mechanism for helping improve their day-to-day, building on the knowledge base that we have over the past 30 years. And you can see that reflected in the research, you can see that absolutely reflected in the advocacy, and you can also see that in the budding education work that's being done as well. So these bills specifically were the byproduct of the collaborations between these organizations, Solve.me included, and the amazing offices of Senator Kaine, Representative Beyer, Representative Bergman, Senator Markey as well was highly involved, and of course Senator Duckworth, the author of the Treat for Long COVID Act. So you can see how all of these different folks pulled together. You'll also notice on some of these bills are some other organizations that we traditionally haven't worked with before. American with Disabilities, other different, like much bigger, frankly, organizations that we haven't had the opportunity to collaborate with before. So now getting into what the product of this collaboration is, these two bills. And how MECFS is specifically represented in them. So taking first the Care for Long COVID Act, which is a multi-part bill, including a patient registry component, which we call research infrastructure, the second, a medical education component, and the third, legal and supportive services. Now, the second part of the bill, the medical and education component, specifically writes into the bill, it's actually in the language, that myalgic encephalomyelitis, fibromyalgia, mast cell activation syndrome, and others must be included in that education. Excuse me. I apologize. I'm losing my voice a little bit from so much talking. Give me just a moment. I will be right back.
And while she's gone, I can continue. We worked really hard to put all those things in there because we knew that it overlapped between both communities. Like I have very severe MCAS, which is why I look like trash today, and I have EDS, and of course I have MECFS. And we know at the very least 50% of those with long COVID are going to qualify for having MECFS, and we've recently had some patient advocacy results that showed that from a long COVID poll, that it may be as high as 73% of those with long COVID will go on to develop MECFS. And so that is why we worked really, really hard, especially those of us on the patient research side of things, worked really hard to get those other syndromes and issues inside of long COVID legislation, because we have a lot of things that overlap. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia. I couldn't have said it better myself. The second bill, the Treat for Long COVID Act, actually has a provision that prioritizes centers with existing knowledge of post-viral illnesses, so that all of these other diseases, specifically MECFS, will be prioritized for funding in that bill. That funds up to $2 million per center, as determined by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Sorry about that. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah. The last element I'd like to also share is just gratitude for the other partners that have really been active and come into this world. I mentioned some of them on the bills. You can see them listed as sponsors if you look at the press releases, but it is a multitude of organizations from the disability community, far beyond just chronic illness. Sorry about that. I'm ready for your next question.
So I'll go and I'll take it again. So what are the next steps that you see that it might take to getting these bills passed?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I lost my audio a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So what are the next steps that you guys are foreseeing that it will take to get these bills passed?
The most important thing we need is Republicans. Our biggest hurdle right now is getting through the committee, and the committee is reluctant to take up our bills without any Republican co-sponsors on them. So that's why Advocacy Month and these meetings with our members of Congress were so important, especially the Republican offices, to really generate that mass swell of support from other members of Congress.
And I guess I will do a follow-up question. For those that don't know, what is the name of the committee that people should be most looking at from here to look at which Republicans to reach out to and try to get on board?
In the Senate, that's the Health Committee. It stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. In the House, it's the Energy and Commerce Committee, Subcommittee on Health.
Sarah Tompkins, do you want to do another question? You're going to do the other question?
Yes. Emily, we'd love to ask, what kind of impact did we have over Advocacy Month and with these meetings?
Oh, that is a great question. The impact was huge. We're already seeing co-sponsors being added to the bills. Members are already contacting me with questions to start adding themselves to the process. We already have some potentially interested Republicans, fingers crossed, and those of you in Republican districts, keep pushing. There are folks that are looking and considering co-sponsoring the bills. It also opened up a dialogue with committee staff so that we can start talking about through those barriers that are preventing it to be taken up in committee and addressing those directly with committee staff. So much is really moving. I can't even keep up with my emails, which is a good thing because that's how much interest and political will and momentum we've generated.
That is fantastic. And it's so important to have bipartisan support like this.
Absolutely.
So I have a question. I was shocked that all of my meetings went really well. Like they were so receptive. My congressional representative, she was actually there. I'm in Arizona, so it was Ann Kirkpatrick. She was there. She had been a lawyer that had actually represented chronic fatigue syndrome patients before, and so she was like, I told my story and she was like, and I assume, you've really struggled with being believed and I'm so sorry. I want you to know that I believe you. And I was like, oh my God, like crying. But so it was really amazing. And then the same with our two senators, Mark Kelly's aide and Kirsten Sinema's aide, were both really receptive. They seem to know quite a bit. So that was great. But my question is, what happens? What are the next steps if that's not the experience that you have with your representative, if they're dismissive, if they're not interested, if they're, like you said, the more difficult representatives tend to be Republicans? What are the ways that we can take next steps when that happens?
The way that I like to approach, and I actually took some of those difficult meetings myself, to really address their concerns, to engage them. Okay, your answer is no. I understand. What specifically about the bill was a no? Is there anything that we could do to adjust that? And then taking those concerns to the committee, to the original bill writers, and negotiating them through amendments in the committee process. So, for example, in one of the meetings I took with a senator who I will not name, they said that they were really opposed to the registry portion because they were concerned about privacy concerns. They were concerned that the data going into the registry didn't have patient notification. There was no knowledge that you got an opt-in consent. To which I said, well, I understand that that's not specifically written into the bill. However, we thought those issues were addressed by utilizing the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI, which is the mechanism that has done these grants for a long time and already has those provisions in place. Are you saying PCORI doesn't have good enough patient consent and patient privacy? And they're like, oh, well, we'd have to look into that and we don't know, but we'd like to see it written into the bill. Like, absolutely. But if we could get a statement from PCORI addressing that, would that make you feel more comfortable? Oh, well, maybe we'll continue. Well, so those are just, you keep flattening the barricades until there's no more barricades left.
Quick follow-up. So Laura on our team told us the story of the representative that was very dismissive, and at the end of it she was like, maybe we'll take a look at this, maybe we won't, something to the effect of, and I get it, I've got 2 kids, so I'm tired all the time. Do you follow up with something like that? Do you write a letter to that office? Like, is that useful at all? Like, not an angry letter, but just a maybe helpful corrective, or is that the type of thing that we just let go and move on to a more receptive aid?
Oh no, we absolutely correct those, especially. Laura and I have already discussed the process for following up with that office. We had several strategies in mind that we talked through. Ultimately, we decided to go with an internal strategy on that one, which I can talk about more in the after part.
Great.
Also, I was playing around on the side where we are like connect to our meetings at, and I saw that there's a spot there where you can contact your person and give them a thank you. And so there's also like a template, that's a really awesome template that's in there that you can copy and paste to thank the people that you had a good experience with. And so I've been doing that, and it's been awesome to get like responses, because I wasn't sure if they, being that they were so busy and that there were so many meetings and all this roll call meetings for votes was happening, that they would like respond, but they all of them responded like the same day. And it wasn't like a generic like, oh, thank you for coming response. It was like, oh, it was a continuing of the conversation that began with the meeting on Advocacy Day. So I definitely say utilize that very nice template, and then just throw in some things that you want to personalize it however you like, and continue that, building that relationship with those people that you met with, and that will help along the way when it comes to passing the legislation and getting more sponsors as well.
Cynthia, I'm so glad you found that tool useful. That's a new addition to the features this year, and I think it's really worth it because it clearly helped.
That is such a good idea. I just moved back to Arizona, and I was like ready to come in and like give Kirsten Sinema a piece of my mind about all these other things. But this issue, which is, in fact, my top issue, their office was really amazing. And so I would really like to give them that positive feedback, because I do think that that positive reinforcement matters just as much as correcting, people when they're incorrect. So
well said. I couldn't agree more.
And even if your representative or staffer isn't immediately able to connect or co-sponsor legislation, you never know when they're going to read a future piece of legislation and think of you and our patient populations and chronic illness patients, because they can remember your story. And that is so powerful, just building that relationship, because it really does help for future advocacy and legislative policies.
Absolutely. Well, were there any other questions before we switch to the second part of the program? Awesome. Well, thank you so much, ladies. And thank you everyone for participating in Advocacy Month. We'll see you next week for Advocacy Cafe Chat 4.